You know, in pop culture, you know, positive thinking, you know, and motivational speakers, I mean, that's really, at the core, it's based on biblical principles of speaking affirmation, speaking blessing. But really, you know, for me, you know, I call my songs declaration songs. I know that I can write positive music, you know, and a lot of Christian music is referred to as positive encouraging. But for me personally, I know the only thing that's really got power to change is the Word of God. So the blessings that come specifically from Scripture is it's eternal, it's power, it's sharper than a double-edged sword. It goes out, it will not return void. That's the difference between speaking a blessing biblically and just giving affirmation and positive words. Though that's good. You need to do that. But I know that for, you know, the blessing is what has the power from Scripture.
Lord, bless us and keep us. Make your face to shine upon us. Raise your countenance on us and give us peace. Lord, bless us and keep us. Make your face to shine upon us. Raise your countenance on us and give us peace.
Well, welcome back to Session 3. Now, you've already gotten an overview of all 5 elements of the blessing. We've drilled down on the first, meaningful touch. In this session, we look at 2 more that are absolutely transformative when it comes to building great relationships. That's spoken message and attaching high value. You'll see what I mean as we jump into Session 3. Now, in Genesis chapter 27, just to kind of review, remember the story of those twins, Jacob and Esau? And the father in Genesis chapter 27 says to his son, "Please come close and kiss me, my son." So that's the appropriate touch. And then he says verbally, "See, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of earth, an abundance of grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you." And he gives him this beautiful blessing that pictures verbally how valuable he is. He says he's like a smelly field. Anybody want to go home and tell your kid, "Boy, you sure smell like, you know, a soccer field today," you know, and you're going, "Well, I don't know if that's really a good thing, Mom." But the bottom line is that you'll hear verbally words are so hugely important. And that's what we want to start off with today, all right, is the second element of the blessing. Now, is anybody, this is a Bible trivia question. So we have some very intelligent, you know, Bible scholars here. But don't you hate Bible trivia? I just hate Bible trivia. Talk about exposing your ignorance. But can I ask you a question? Did Moses ever get to go into the promised land? Okay, now everybody goes, no, because he died just before he went into the promised land. But, hang on a minute, at the Transfiguration, guess who came to stand with Jesus on the mountain? Was Moses and Elijah. And the Mount of Transfiguration is inside the Holy Land. And all of a sudden, a voice, words come out of heaven, and his father says, "This is my beloved son." He heard it. He said it. And that's not the only time. At the baptism scene, do you remember that? Jesus comes out of the water, and again, the Father speaks. So 2 different times, Almighty God says to his Son, Jesus, takes the time verbally to say how valuable his Son is. Well, let me give you a quick example in a family context. I was in Hollywood, Florida, which is a good-sized city in Florida, and there was a family there that went to a conference. Now, I didn't talk to them during the conference. I got a letter afterwards, and I opened up the letter and had a picture, and it was so cute. And what it was there was a dad there, and he was one of these detailed, organized kind of guys who was actually taking notes, you know. And so he's taken notes, both people there at the seminar that were, he was one of them, and on all 5 elements of the blessing. And so he decided afterwards that he would go to take each of his daughters. Now, they have 3 kids, but the oldest he started with, and then the middle one, and then the little one, he was going to wait because she was too little at the time. He since has done this, but he was going to take them out for a daddy-daughter date. Doesn't that sound like a great idea? And at that daddy-daughter date, he would give that child his blessing. So he does everything we're going to talk about in session 6 on the Blessing Challenge. He writes out his blessing, so he's got it all queued up. He figures a really neat way to share it with her, and that's a little daddy-daughter breakfast, and he takes the older one out. And who here has more than one kid? Who has more than one kid? All right, now if you only have one kid, then you always know who did it, right? But if you have more than one kid, then if you do it for the older one, what happens with the younger one? When's it my turn? When's it my turn? So he takes the 9-year-old out. They have a great time. Now here's the little 4-year-old. And when's my turn? When's my turn? And he goes, it's coming. And finally, there it is. And he takes her out to breakfast, this little 4-year-old. And watch what he does is he sits down with her, and he reaches out and he holds her hand, and they pray for the food. And then he held his other hand out, so appropriate touch. And he says, now I want you to know something. I want to verbally have you hear something that's my blessing to you. And so he sits there and he reads this little 4-year-old his blessing. And of course, in his mind, and you'll learn more about the blessing as we come up, he has every one of those 5 elements. I touched her, said it verbally, words that attached high value. He says to her, he says, sweetheart, if we lined up every 4-year-old in Hollywood, Florida, every one, and we could go down the row and we could pick any 4-year-old to take home and bless, super smart or pretty hair or, the best athlete or the whatever. If we could pick any kid, guess who we would walk up to every single time? We'd choose you. So he's touched her, spoken message that attaches high value to her, and he's thinking, boy, I did it. And he reaches for his fork. Well, when he reaches for his fork, her little 4-year-old hand goes out and lays on his hand, so he can't get his fork up, And so he's kind of shocked, and he looks at his daughter, and that little girl says to him, longer, Daddy, longer. And now he writes when he said 4 times in a row, because now he's off script, right? He had written everything out, so he's already read her, and now he's off script. He says, well, you're also very kind, and you're good with your sister and the pets. But 4 times in a row, she was hungrier for what? His words and his blessing, even than she was. She finally ate her pancakes, but 4 times in a row, she goes, longer, Daddy, longer. And that's what words do, but not just any kind of words, okay? The words that we're talking about are words that attach high value. Now, that's one great thing that Jesus did with us, isn't it? I mean, if you really think about the kind of people that he walked up to, these rough fishermen, and he saw a tremendous value in them, a tax collector that everybody hated, this really short guy that's, everybody hates him. I mean, if you get the picture, there's all these broken, beat up, hurting people, and Jesus was so great at coming alongside him and saying, hey, get down here. I'm going to your house, and blessing him. And even the leper, do you remember that came up to him and beseeched him, and he reached out, and what did Jesus do? Touched him, which he just didn't happen. Well, Jesus was a master at attaching high value. I passed out the first session, so if you weren't able to see that one, then you haven't seen these, but we have these blessing coins that we encourage people to use as a memorial marker, and they're kind of cool. Well, where that idea came from was I get the great privilege of doing some different things at military bases all over the country, and sometimes out of the country. I just was at Thule Air Force Base in Greenland, which is really cool. And but if you do a good job, they don't do this every time, so I hardly ever get these. But if you do a really good job, if they think you did a really good job, then the base commander or somebody that's there that's pretty high up will give you a coin. And so here's some pretty cool. Diane, you can pass these around and look at them. But that was the idea. Now, these are really expensive and cost a lot of money. Ours are just more memorial little kinds of things. But the idea is, hey, we want you to know that we really appreciate what you've done, and we really appreciate that. So that's attaching high value. If you get one of those, you're supposed to keep them with you forever, but or nobody does. They just kind of set them out because you don't want to lose them. They're so valuable, right? Well, another thing is, where you see that with that attaching high value is I'm a slow distance jogger, right above a crawl, and I don't look like it, but I run half marathons, and occasionally I'll do a marathon just for punishment. But when you run 13.1, for example, you get some of these really cool medals. So here's an Arizona one, and then here's one from the Chicago Rock and Roll Half Marathon where I thought I was going to die because of the humidity, because when you're from Arizona. And then, of course, the one that is the most valuable to me, is the 26.2, is the full marathon. I ran the San Diego Marathon. I called Cindy, my precious, awesome wife, at mile 22 because I was way ahead of my time goals, and I called her on a payphone and said, "Unbelievable, I'm doing great." And then all the hills started. But I did finish right ahead of the lady with the jogging stroller. So, but the bottom line is you get these medals, right? Now, the thing is that kind of says, boy, you did it. Okay, well, I'm convinced that when it comes to our kids, you got to hear me on this, okay, and our loved one and our spouse, for some of us, maybe we say to them, well, I'll give you the blessing if you'll run 26.2, okay? Wayne, your dad was wise enough. Explain a little bit about how, with spoken words, that attached high value to you when you started ministry, right?
Well, thanks, John. When I began my ministry, I was about to be ordained, and I had asked my father, who was a preacher at a gospel rescue mission in Buffalo, New York, if he would come out to Arizona and preach my ordination sermon. And that was a thrill for me and for him, I guess, too. Then he made some incredible comments about my life, my ministry, and it was such a blessing. And I'll tell you, John, that sustained me, the sustaining power of the blessing over 47 years and now 50-some years of ministry after that happened. I reflect back on that often and think, even in the tough times, my dad believed in me, and he said, "This is my beloved son, hear him."
Wow. And I mean, and to hear that from somebody like that, your dad, and hand him a medal, would you? I mean, so put that on. Would you? I mean, how cool is that?
I should put it on my dad.
Yeah, I know. But you're right, you should put it on your dad. But I mean, it's like your dad saying, you know what, here you're starting your ministry. Again, it's not tied in necessarily with performance. Well, Diane, that's why I wanted to talk to you for a second, because you guys have some awesome, wonderful kids, and but yeah, as a homeschool mom, a lot of time the focus was what? On
getting things done, checking off my list, academics. I mean, we started out character. That was the reason why, I started. And we went all the way through 8th grade, part of high school. And it didn't occur to me until this year.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, my 21-year-old, I said to him, he was very capable, and I said, "Matthew, I probably didn't affirm you enough in who you are in Christ. I told you what a great student, and you aced this and that," and he made it very easy for me. And so I said, "You know what? Please forgive me for that. I should have taken more time just to say, who you are, the beloved." And so I asked forgiveness, and he was quiet for a moment. He said, "Thank you, Mom." And I kind of expected him to say, "Oh, no, you did a great job." So it was real humbling, but he needed to hear that, even as a 21-year-old.
Yeah, as a 21-year-old. So this is what I hope you're hearing. A lot of you in here have younger kids. Some of your kids are older. Remember Isaac, when he blessed Jacob, his son, Jacob was 40 years old when he says, get over here and give me a hug and give me a kiss. And I think what happens is, again, man, our kids, I don't care what age they are, but if you can start early saying to them, you know what, we're not saying that performance isn't important and your kids need to do well and you don't want to just, praise them for things they don't do and all of that. We understand that, right? But the bottom line is that we don't want to put the blessing out of reach. You want to attach high value to them. Well, one last story about this, spoken words, because see, sometimes those spoken words can be written words, And now, I mentioned I grew up in a single-parent home. My mom and dad divorced when I was 2.5 months old. I never met my dad till I was in high school. When I did meet him, he was an angry alcoholic, and I used to hate my dad. And then I became a Christian, and I just intensely disliked him. And it took me years before I was able to forgive him and realize no wonder he bailed on his family, first family, then our family, then the next family. That's what his dad had done. And so, he didn't know the light of the world, and unfortunately. And so he was never able, he was just broken, bless his heart. He was a World War II guy that I am very grateful for his service. We hang all of his medals and everything up. He was wounded and got the Bronze Star and the Silver Star at Guadalcanal. And so we're very appreciative of the parts of him that God used in a lot of ways. But I'm telling you, spoken message, attaching high value, I would have given anything to just hear it, ever. And here's something interesting. When the Lord was getting ready to open up the tabernacle, and he wakes up Solomon, who's the king, in the middle of the night, and he says to him, Solomon, now remember, he had already woken up Solomon earlier and said, hey, you're going to be the king. What do you want? Anything. What do you want? And Solomon wisely says what? Wisdom. Okay. But now he wakes him up another time, a second time. Wakes Solomon up in the middle of the night. The next day, the tabernacle and the temple they've been using the tabernacle that moved around. Now they're moving into the temple, and there's this big, huge fireworks display from heaven the next day. But the night before all the ceremony, again, you got to hear that he says to him, he says, forever my name and my eyes and my heart will be there for you. And so it was a beautiful picture of him hearing from Almighty God that, you know what, tomorrow's the big celebration. You've done all these great things, but I want you to know that you have high value, that I'm here with you. Well, I never heard that from my dad, but one day I met my great uncle. Now, the story goes like this. I went to TCU, home of the mighty what? The Mighty Frogs, the Mighty Frogs. Back then, Purple Frogs, we struck fear in the heart of the Longhorns, that's for sure. We were in the Southwest Conference. And I was taking a class at TCU, and they said, oh, you got to go to SMU to use their library. And I go over to the library at SMU, and here is, I'm trying to find the circulation desk, and here's the behind the circulation desk is at the time, I don't know if it's still there, but is a big glass office, and it says head librarian, and it says Robert M. Trent. And I'm a college student, and I'm a young life leader, and I'm kind of like Diana, and I'm not afraid of talking to anybody. There's no strangers, kind of a deal. And so I'm walking, and the door's open, and he's sitting right there. And I shouldn't have, but being a goofy college kid, I stick my head in the door, and I go, hey, Uncle Bob, because it said Robert M. Trent on the door. Hey, Uncle Bob, I'm your long-lost nephew, John Trent from Arizona. And his mouth drops open, and he goes, are you Joe Trent's boy? And I had never met any of my dad's family. He left when we were 2 months old. I'd never met any of my dad's family, and I had walked into, that was my great uncle. So it was my dad's uncle. So it was my great uncle. I had walked in, and I sit down, I used to go, sit down. And long story short is I got to build a great relationship with him. He hated Christians at the time. I didn't tell him I was a Christian right off, but they were intellectuals, PhD, Cambridge people, and he was the head of the library. But long story short is a few years go by, and his wife was hit by a wrecker and almost died. And I sat with him for 4 hours during the first surgery, and then I sat with him for 3 days as we didn't know if and we just prayed and prayed and prayed. And the doctor came in after 3 days. This is a 70-year-old woman that they said wasn't going to make it. And finally, after 3 days, the doctor comes in and goes, this is a total miracle. She's going to live. And we cried and hugged, my Uncle Max and I. And my Uncle Max says to me, he goes, well, okay, for 3 days we've been praying. You've got to tell me who we've been praying to. And so I get to lead him to Christ at Baylor Hospital in the waiting room. And he becomes the closest thing I've ever had to a dad. My great uncle. He told me all about my dad. I was able to forgive my dad because I heard all this stuff from my uncle. So years would go by, and Aunt Sally lived another 4 years, thank the Lord, after that really tough time in the hospital. And then about another 5 years would go by, and all of a sudden, Uncle Max is really hurting and sick, and I get this letter. And I carry this letter with me everywhere. It begins, and he says, now I know this is going to come as a surprise, and I know you're in exams and things like that. He goes, but I have decided to do a living will, and I'm sure you'll agree with its principles. And he goes on and talks about his lawyer is going to contact me, and I have to be the one that, I don't know if anybody's ever had to do that, but you have to sign all these forms that say, you know, you're the one that says no heroics is the bottom line. And so you go on and, you know, he writes some nice things, but you get to the end of the letter and he writes this. He goes, thank you, John. You have helped me so much up to this point, and I'm sure you will continue to do so because you are my son. And now I never heard that from my own dad. I carry his name, but he never chose. Remember, the blessing's a choice. He never chose to put his name on me, to speak blessing over me. But I thank God for my mom that did it 24/7, and I thank the Lord for Uncle Max, and I've got his word on it. You know what that's like? When you finish a marathon or a half marathon, you know, there's these volunteers that you don't know, but you feel like they're your best friend. You know, and they put this medal on you, and you go, you did it. But I thank the Lord that when He asks us to bless others, apart from performance, He says to us, you know what, you are my beloved. And that's what we need to be doing as a part of the blessing. You know, one of the greatest reasons to give the blessing to your kids is not only does it open their heart and life to your love, but to their heavenly Father's as well. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, you know, we're told that, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one." That's a beautiful passage. Well, guess what it does right after that in Deuteronomy? It tells us that we're to teach that truth to our kids when they lay down at night, when they rise up, as we go along the way. Well, think about using your words, appropriate, meaningful touch, to teach and to bless and to encourage them. And there's so many practical ways to do that. You can talk to and praise and encourage your kids when you're dropping them off at school, just before they go to practice. Think about praying a blessing over them before they, you drop them off for soccer or football or baseball practice, whatever. But the bottom line is, when you use your words to bless, it opens up their heart and life to you and the Lord and to others. We used to do, for example, some things with our kids with using words that can be really fun. For example, remember parent-teacher nights? Or if you have current children that are in that grade school age and they're going to parent-teacher nights, well, what we would do is we would write out little blessings for them. Something about them we loved, or a character trait or something, and I'd write out 10 or 15 of them on sticky notes. We'd go to parent-teacher night. I know you're supposed to be listening to the teacher, so while Cindy was listening, I'd be sticking sticky notes in their books, down on their desk somewhere. So all throughout for the next 2 or 3 weeks, when they'd open up a folder or they'd look at a book, there'd be a sticky note, and they would read about some words. So putting your words can be both verbally and writing them down. I remember picking up the kids at school. Another thing we did to really encourage words and conversation and positive things like that is I'd take a tennis ball in the car, and of course you have to be a good driver to do this. So here's our kids sitting there. Let's say it was Carrie, and we're driving home, and I'd ask her how her day went. Well, what does the average kid say? Well, fine. So then it'd say, well, tell me one thing you did today. And I'd toss her the tennis ball. Well, then she had to answer And after she answered, she'd toss me back the ball. And then I'd toss her another question, and then she'd toss me back the ball. Now, if driving, if that sounds too scary for you to do that, then just do that at home. But I'm telling you, over the years, it got to be almost a 20-question, really fun game, the tennis ball kind of a thing. When we had friends of theirs in their car, we'd toss them the tennis ball. And what it does is it helps them not only learn to communicate, but it gives you a great way to share things and find out about their life as well. Now, if you're still sitting there and going, well, using words is just really tough, or I don't know what to say, there are some resources that we have developed around blessing kids. One of them called Bedtime Blessings. It actually comes in a volume 1 and a volume 2, and it's a great way with younger kids. It's basically a short blessing that Cindy and I used to do with all our girls. Well, Focus on the Family had us capture those, and what a lot of parents do, there's little games or little thoughts or little things that they do. You put them to bed with a little blessing, but it always ends with a prayer, a blessing as well. So if you need some coaching, then look into a resource like that. Whatever you do, just begin the process of using your words to bless others. It can be a powerful way to give and live the blessing. Let me try to pull together what we've talked about already with an example of what we did with a Sunday school class that my wife and I teach at our home church. Bottom line is, we teach a class, we taught these young families that really want to bless and encourage their kids and raise them up in the faith. We taught them about those 5 elements of the blessing, and then we had them go online to theblessing.com, sign up, take the Blessing Challenge, where they write out a letter of blessing to their kids. Well, then what we did is, after some coaching and after taking some Sundays to write out that letter, we had everybody get together after church. We kind of rented out the family center. And again, everybody else took off. Our families moved in. We brought in a ton of pizza. And then what ended up happening was all of these families fanned out all across the room, and with their child gave them the blessing, read it to them with their touch, words that attached high value. Now watch this. It's all over. We've done some worship songs at the first, eaten pizza. They've blessed their kids. Now we do a closing worship song, and everybody's had a great time. And this big burly Phoenix fireman comes just wading through all these people and grabs me, literally picks me up, and he's crying. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And he hugs me, and he puts me back down, and he goes, do you know what just happened? And I go, no. And he said, well, I didn't really want to do this. I mean, my wife was into this, and I just thought, I tell my kids I love them all the time. They know I love them. But he goes, I just sat down with my kids, and you started with the oldest one, and they had 3 kids, and picture this guy has blonde hair, and his wife's super blonde, and these kids are all just like them, these blonde kids. So he starts with the oldest one, and he reads his 10-year-old this letter of blessing with his hand on him, big stud fireman guy. And as he reads him the blessing, and then he prays a prayer for him at the end, and then he looks up, and his son's crying. And he goes, what's wrong? And he goes, Daddy, do you really feel that way about me? And he starts crying. I mean, here he's told him 1,000,000 times. But just by putting that blessing together with his words, with his touch, that attaches high value, all of a sudden it came together. I love that story because it is so easy for us to just assume that they have our blessing. Don't do that. Be intentional. Passing down our faith is something we do intentionally. Blessing our kids is something that we do intentionally. So really use your words to attach high value to those kids. And whether you do it as a Sunday school class like we did, or you do it all by yourself, it doesn't matter. They need to know that they have your blessing. That's a great thing to keep in mind. Well, we've come to the end of another session, and it's time we would encourage you now to actually share and talk about this whole idea of using spoken words and attaching high value. Was that a part of what you heard? Were there people in your life that blessed you verbally and helped you feel like that you had great value? Now, I want you to understand, it may not always be, unfortunately, a parent. It might be that coach that saw great potential in you, and that was the one that really infused some things in your life that God used later on. It could be a teacher. I get letters all the time from somebody that'll say, I never got the blessing at home, but I did from Miss so-and-so or Mr. whoever the teacher who took that time to bless others. I'm telling you, people that are teachers are frontline people of blessing. So do those two things. First is share your own life experience of did you hear words that attached high value? But then here's the second thing we'd like you to do. You've heard a lot about those three things, touch and spoken words and attaching high value. This week, after, before you head, whenever your next session is, I'd really encourage you to think of one person intentionally where you actually do this. I mean, it could be somebody you're carpooling with and they're really down and you use your words to attach high value to them. It could be a child or a relative or a friend or that person that's on your child's team that really needs a word of encouragement that you realize isn't getting it from anybody else. So pick somebody else to apply these three elements of the blessing to, and then we'll see you next time as we talk about the last two elements of the blessing, picturing a special future and genuine commitment. We'll see you next time.